Get ready for a night of timeless masterpieces as the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra presents Eroica. The evening welcomes guest violinist Luann Lee to perform Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. The concert closes with Beethoven's groundbreaking Symphony No. 3, Eroica. With its sweeping energy and bold sound, the symphony celebrates the triumph of the human spirit. Join the WCO on November 14th at 7:30 p.m. for Eroica. Tickets available at wcoconcerts.org/Eroica. Eroica. You know that one outlet you have that's obviously overloaded? Things to remember about November: there's less daylight, space heaters are coming out, holiday lights are going up, and that's an electrical stress test. For $149, Cardinal checks outlets, switches, circuits, panels, and delivers a report with plain English next steps, so you can host Thanksgiving without praying the breaker holds. Schedule now at cardinalservice.com or call 608-291-9551. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, do you have plans for how to honor Veterans Day this year? Tomorrow, to mark the holiday, a local group of musicians, historians, and theater artists are bringing together stories of Wisconsinites who lived through World War I with a rock and roll multimedia performance on the Barrymore stage. I'm so excited to hear about this. With me now is Ken Fitzsimmons. Hi, Ken.
Hello, Bianca.
Yes. So, Ken, you're one of the co-founders of the Kissers, Madison's #1 Irish rock band. Tell me, how did an Irish rock band member get involved with celebrating Veterans Day? Like, what's the crossover?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, Irish music is full of history and storytelling. And so I'm a World War I historian or hobbyist historian. And for anyone who is familiar with World War I, November 11th is a very significant day because it's the day that marks the war ends on November 11th, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, literally. And then that day became Armistice Day and then later became Veterans Day.
It's a special time of day. It's a special date. And, you know, folks might not know this, but Wisconsin itself does not recognize Veterans Day as a legal state holiday, which I recently learned. What do you see as the importance of celebrating this day, marking this day, especially in such a unique way, like a rock show that we're going to get more details about?
So the reason we put on these types of rock and roll history shows, as we like to call them, as my good friend Sean Michael Dargan coined, is we're really trying to build connection with people across time. And the significance of this show on Veterans Day, Armistice Day, is that Armistice Day was a holiday meant to celebrate those who died in the war and to celebrate the peace that they achieved by fighting that war or by the sacrifice that they made. And there was another world war, of course, and then it got rededicated as Veterans Day in 1954. And actually the dedication by Eisenhower is almost exactly the same. He says very similar words. We want to remember those who died and, you know, celebrate this peace that was part of what they were fighting for. And the, Veterans Day recognitions have, I think, evolved over time, right? Veterans Day tends to be a bit more, military focused. And what this is bringing it back to its roots, not just Armistice Day, but even the roots of Veterans Day, if reading the proclamation, which is just that. We do a remembrance and we remember the stories of the people who worked for peace. And when we put it in that context, it becomes even broader. So there's the Veterans Museum here, Wisconsin Veterans Museum talks about every veteran is a story. And that is very much how we approach it. And we have a lens that extends beyond just people who served in the war in this show, but certainly the veterans are due their recognition.
Tell us about what this show is, like what folks can expect. What are you bringing to the Barrymore stage?
Yeah, so you come into the Barrymore and you walk into the lobby and you're going to start seeing right away, you're going to see some banners that are standing, these sort of 7 feet tall banners that have a picture of someone, and it tells a story about them. And these are veterans, people who served in the armed forces, and nurses. And these are coming from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. You keep walking through the lobby and you'll come to a table where the Veterans Museum is tabling, and they have a trunk full of items from World War I that you can handle. You can grab them and take a look at them and start just feeling kind of closer to this history and this time period. And then you walk in to the theater. And of course, you'll see the band set up, like before show, and you'll see the drums and the guitars and stuff. But you also see this LED video wall. It's like a screen, except that it illuminates itself. It's not a projector, but a much brighter screen. Then the lights come down, and the show begins. And the Barrymore gets transformed as the music starts to come forward. The lighting. Oh my gosh, the lighting. We really capture this environment, whether it's we're going to come right down to me and I'm telling you something, a story, something personal, or it becomes big and we're talking about something big that happened, involved a lot of people. And then as we start playing these songs about these people, about this time period, and behind us, images of people who lived 100 years ago during World War I, people who served, people who worked, people who resisted, their images are towering over the band as we talk about them and then as we sing about them. And so it becomes this just environment of immersion where we are connecting with people across time. There's sort of, it's non-linear. Time has sort of ceased to exist as we are here in this moment, Wisconsin and France, and it's World War I, but we're in the Barrymore. That's a rock and roll history show.
You are really bringing it to life, and I am fully sold. And, I'm out here. I love Irish folk music, and y'all are Irish rock and rollers. Are these rock ballads? What's the music itself like and the stories you're going to be telling?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, it's rooted in the Kissers sound, which, as you say, right, it's, Irish rock. We do have some Irish folk roots as well, although we definitely lean more towards the rock side at least as far as Irish folk is concerned. But, when I write, I just write what comes out. Now, I've got a tin whistle in the band, I've got a mandolin, I got a fiddle, so inevitably it's, accordion, right? So it's going to have some of that sound, but yet I just kind of let it come out. And, I grew up on all kinds of different music. Bruce Springsteen, for example, was a big one in my house, but so were the Beatles and the Ramones and, Buddy Holly, all kinds of stuff. And, all kinds of stuff. I grew up in the 80s.
Right. A certain group, but a pretty powerful range, powerful actors. Singers.
Yeah, I think it extends. We the Kissers have a punk rock background. We used to play at O'Case Corral, right? So we've run a gamut. I guess I'm thinking of some of the things I'm pulling on with this music. But as I was saying before, with Irish music has some common themes, right? Telling history in Irish music, very, very common. Songs of resistance are very common. Ireland is a country that was occupied for 800 years before they got their independence. So they're really good at it. And they're very good at storytelling.
Some of the best storytellers out there. And, there's this moment of songs of resistance from Ireland that I'm hearing today, and I feel like the power of music during wartime and after war is a tale as old as time, where music serves as a balm and connector both during conflict and after the war has ended when vets come back home to face the war here. So how are you thinking about that heritage and music's connection to today?
It's integral, right? So I'm a musician. That's my profession, right? People generously refer to me as historian. I sometimes balk at that term only because I have a lot of respect for true historians, going to the primary sources, living in the archives, citing, doing all that. I really rely on their work and sort of reinterpret it, reimagine it into this new setting of, music and image. So the reason we combine all of this is because, I can tell you the story about someone and what they did, and it's moving, hopefully, right? It's moving to me anyway. Hopefully it's moving to you and everyone else as well. And then we can show their picture, which sort of draws you in more. Now you see it, now you're starting to feel that connection. And then the music, right? And the music bypasses the brain, and this goes right to your heart and right to your soul. And it's this the same thing you said with everything else. It can be a healing balm. It can be therapeutic. And it can say things to you that words cannot. And when we combine these very powerful forces, that's what really builds connection. In fact, I'd say I'm not trying to teach anybody anything, really. I'm just trying to build connection.
Yeah, you've been performing World War I history rock and roll shows since the 100-year anniversary of the end of the war, which really wasn't that long ago. That was like back in 2018. Can you tell me about that? I know you had a major show in 2018 to mark that, and also an album that was involved.
So in 2018, this is really the catalyst for the whole thing. So my friend John Wedge and Sean Michael Dargan and my good friend Jason Fassel, who's working on this new project with me, we got together and wanted to create a 100-year commemoration of Armistice Day, or the end of World War I. And that's where we created this first rock and roll history show. We got the LED wall, we got the visuals, the bands. And for that show, we actually had many bands perform. The Kissers were about half of the show. I got to be the artistic director and put together all the imagery and worked with all the artists about the material they might play, and did some research of songs from the time and things like that. It was a big project, came together very quickly, and I was skeptical that anyone would come, because who's going to come to a show about World War I? And much to my surprise, at 7 p.m., we had to delay the start of the show because there was a line down the block.
Wow. That is wild.
It was totally wild. And people, the comments we got afterwards were just sort of, people were moved. It was exciting. It was thought-provoking, chilling, rocking, just all the things that you kind of want people to say. And so we were so inspired that we actually did remount it one more time. So the next year in 2019, we played at Shannon Hall at the UW Madison Theater with the whole big crew again. And that pretty much was the life of that. And then I realized a couple of years later that I wanted to capture this music that I had written or the Kissers had arranged for the show. We had about 11 songs or so, 12, I think. So that was the inspiration to putting out the album, The Foe and the Fallen, Songs from the Greatest War, right? As the title suggests. Now, it's important to note that this is a piece of the Greatest War, like sort of pulling the Kissers part of the Greatest War, out. And that's why it's got a different name. And I had been wanting to play some sort of rock and roll history show based on the Greatest War. I knew that show couldn't tour, right? It just wasn't practical and wasn't meant to be that. But if we could have something more mobile, then maybe we could. And when I walked off the stage of the Baroque last year at our album release show, so this was just more of a regular concert, I walked off the stage there and I was getting comments from people similar to the Greatest War. I mean, they were really moved by it and touched and so thankful, and I was humbled by it. And I realized, oh, this is it. This is what I can turn into a new rock and roll history show that's at least born from the Greatest War, a new standalone, tourable rock and roll history show. So that is the roots of The Foe and the Fallen. Stories from the Greatest War is what we call this when it comes as a full rock and roll history show.
Well, it's really exciting to know that these are all stories of Wisconsinites in this album. Let's get a taste of the album. This is a part from Dear Mother.
Dear Mother, hello from somewhere in France. Thanks for the mail you sent. And don't worry, though I might not make it home. That's sometimes how it goes. I'm sure that I'll be all right.
Imagine what it would be like to not be able to afford to put a meal on your table this Thanksgiving. Too many of our neighbors don't have to imagine. That's their reality. With rising food prices and cuts to food aid programs, food insecurity is a crisis in Madison. That's why Goodman Community Center runs the annual Thanksgiving Basket Drive. They're giving 4,000 families in our community all the groceries they need to cook a delicious Thanksgiving dinner at home. Everything from gravy, veggies, stuffing, dessert, and of course, the turkey. But they need our help to collect all the food and funds needed to fill all of those 4,000 baskets. If you can afford to do so, go to goodmancenter.org/Thanksgiving and learn how you can help. You can donate food, start a food drive, or donate funds. Together, we can ensure that thousands of our friends and neighbors have a joyful Thanksgiving.
You know, when most of us want to learn a new language, it's not because we're dying to memorize grammar tables or ace a quiz. It's because we actually want to speak it out in the real world with real people. And that's what Babbel is great at, getting you there fast. Hey, it's Michael Zibiak, Chief Revenue Officer here at CityCast. My daughter's a senior in high school, and after graduation, we're taking a father-daughter trip to Spain. And right now, my Spanish is, let's just say, very high school level. Shout out to Senior Patty from Syosset High School. You tried. When we're in Spain, I'd love to do more than just ask where the bathroom is. I want to be able to chat with locals, order tapas, and actually connect, not just read the menu and point. So I'm starting with Babbel. It's all about small steps, big wins, and it's super easy to fit into my life. Honestly, with how busy things get here at CityCast, I love that Babbel's bite-sized, 10-minute lessons fit right into my day, between meetings or over my morning coffee. I'm excited to pick up some real-world Spanish before we go, so we can experience Spain like locals, not tourists. Doesn't that sound better? Right now, Babbel's got a special deal for our listeners. Get up to 55% off your subscription at babbel.com/citycast. That's BABBEL.com/citycast for up to 55% off. Rules and restrictions may apply. Gracias and adios.
I'm really curious. You mentioned, like your personal connection to this, the Great War. Is it kind of like your Roman Empire? Like there just seems to be something like what connected you to want to dive into these stories and the way that you did, like so personally.
Yeah, it's totally my Roman Empire. So I love that. I kind of stumbled on the history. I used to study war a lot, right? I studied the Civil War for a long time. I studied World War II for a long time. And I remember being in a bookstore many, many, many years ago and looking at the big shelf of Civil War books and the big shelf of World War II books. And then between them were like 5 titles, with names like the First World War, World War I, the Great War. It's a war with a lot of names. And I thought, boy, that's an awfully ominous title for something that seems to have so little attention. So I literally just grabbed a book at random off the shelf. I think it was John Keegan's The First World War. And little did I know, I had just entered the rabbit hole, or the foxhole, as they might say, I guess, in the battle terms.
Nice.
And the reason why World War I is so compelling is that it is connected to so much. Like if you want to understand World War II, you really got to go back to World War I. It's still today things being played out. Borders were drawn or were begun to be drawn from the results of World War I. So that's one big reason. That's kind of the history geek in me. It's very relevant and it's real.
Which I connect to, by the way, the feeling of like, wait a second, like why isn't there more on World War I when it's the first one? Like this is the beginning of the World War II we hear everything about.
Yeah, and I'll say to that point that there's a few reasons. Like why did World War I start? Well, it's like don't really know. It's assassination of Franz Duke Ferdinand, these alliances, but what does that really explain it? And the answer is no. It's still debated today. And it's something we talk about in the show that we kind of leave this to poets and artists to really delve into because it's this like culture of war. And it ends terribly. Right? It ends suddenly at 11 o'clock on November 11th, just very random. And then there's this terrible Treaty of Versailles that is just, sacked by historians. And, basically people say, pretty much calls the next World War, which was even bigger and worse. So it's like, yeah, why would we want to spend time there? That just sounds really awful. But it's almost because it's a less, and I hope this isn't an offensive term to somebody, but a less sexy war than World War II, right? It's very rich in terms of material to write about. And in a more general sense, to really understand history is to understand people, right? Because that's really, we say events, but really, unless it's like a natural disaster, the event is people. And even those disasters are disasters because they've affected people. And so that's how we really feel a connection. And for me, I've come to realize that when I read history, my motivation isn't the facts and the dates, and the country names and things like that. And sure, I remember some of it. Yeah, I have a brain for it, maybe. But what is my real motivation is the human condition, the truths that remain no matter the time period. All right, our style of clothes might change, the way people talk, their exact way of communicating in the world, whether it was on a telegram or with on a horse, whatever, a lantern. Those things change, but what I've come to discover is that what we struggle with as society and as individuals are basically the same. These tendencies for, some examples, like in World War I, like there is tons of fake news in World War I. There's these headlines that just simply aren't true. They're just made up. I don't even know where they're coming from, but they're printed and therefore people believe them. There's a tendency to oppress free speech during the war. Literally, they passed the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act, and people are getting arrested. Victor Berger from Milwaukee gets arrested under the Espionage Act for speaking out against the war and sentenced to 20 years in prison, like not like a little thing.
That DNA is still there, like replicating. Like these things are truly, they say that history will repeat itself until you understand it, but maybe history is always going to repeat itself. And that's just,
Yeah, exactly. Well, what it is we're people. Humans are repeating themselves, right? We keep doing the same things.
Generation to generation.
Yeah. Beneath all of this is actually some optimism and some celebration. And I will say, and this is again why I keep coming back to it, because experiencing the struggles of others across time makes me feel less alone. When connection can span centuries, it doesn't have to be this linear thing. And that's a big goal of the whole rock and roll history show, is like, I'm hoping that others will be affected by the history in the same way I am, but I realize that not everyone's going to sit down and read a 700-page history book.
Well, here's the thing, Ken, is like just from listening to you, I just super appreciate it that you and, whoever you're conspiring with and whoever you're making music with, you guys are artists deciphering history, and listening to you is so enjoyable. Like you have a musicality to how you express bits, and the care that you have that it connects and transcends and that you want to bring this history forward is really like core to what we're talking about today, and marking Veterans Day and marking a very significant part of our history that really doesn't get the coverage that it deserves. We just heard a little bit of the music. We're talking about this big show that you're going to be highlighting these stories that you've sourced from the Wisconsin Historical Society and the Wisconsin Veterans Museum of real people that lived in Wisconsin. And if you could share just a little bit about the history of what Wisconsin was like during World War I. I know that could be a documentary, but like, does anything stand out to you that you could share with us, like a little nugget or a story from your album that particularly, grabs you?
Yeah, Wisconsin is actually got some pretty crazy history around World War I. And I didn't even know about this until I was kind of deep into the research already and already planned to do the show. And I discovered that a couple things about Wisconsin. So that in that song, for example, we were hearing firsthand accounts of Wisconsinites who served in the war. And some of them were, I think most of them in that song were volunteers. We talk about a nurse named Helen Bolowski, who grew up on Few Street, who was trained to be a nurse and then went to France as a nurse. But before the war, our senator, Wisconsin Senator Robert M. La Follette, was adamantly opposed to the United States joining, and he never backs down from that stance, even when it is basically illegal to do so.
Well, our fighting Bob La Follette, he was fighting the war.
Yep, fighting against the war, right? And then we have a huge socialist movement in Wisconsin during this time. The Socialist Party is a sizable party. We have a number of members of the Wisconsin legislature who are socialists. Victor Berger, I mentioned earlier, gets elected U.S. representative as on the socialist ticket. And Milwaukee will have socialist mayors all the way into the 60s. Socialists don't want workers fighting other workers, no matter what country they're from. Okay, so they're opposed to the war. And as I'm sure people will be thinking of, we have a lot of German Americans in Wisconsin, and they are not particularly excited about fighting their relatives and friends back at home. So all of this results in some alarming headlines around the nation, one of which says something to the effect of, will Wisconsin be known when the war is over as the traitor state? So I wrote a song. So that's in there.
That's good.
Yeah, that's some right
juicy.
material. Totally. So traitor state is in there. And what I wrote in the song is like an argument between Wisconsin and the rest of the country. So there's two of us kind of have this back and forth in the way that arguments don't really, two people not really listening to each other, right? Just kind of yelling at each other. There's
so much relevance to all of the things that you've just brought up, by the way, to today.
Right. The human condition, right? But then the war's declared anyway, right? And Wisconsin has some of the highest numbers of volunteers, if not the highest, in the nation. And you look at the casualty lists or the casualty numbers, and Wisconsin is, I think, around 10th in the country, but we're much further down than that in population. So,
wow, yeah, that's significant.
Right. So a disproportionate number of people serving and dying in the war. And so Wisconsin is a swing state back then, too. We're both against and for the war.
Wow.
I found that to be pretty incredible. And like you said, talking about history repeating itself.
Yeah. And what's really cool is, folks can go to the show and have this amazing experience that you've described and hear some of these stories and really, bring this history to light so we can learn some things and connect with each other. And I want to note that, you're a part of the Kissers, and someone who's going to be playing tomorrow is you're part of a new mega group performing called Mobilize the Poets. So you're taking a new name. The Kissers still exist, but Mobilize the Poets is a super group. Can you talk about that choice? Like, why create a separate group and what's behind the name?
Sure. So Mobilize the Poets is a cross-discipline troupe. We've got musicians, historians, theater artists, visual artists, and it's ever growing.
It's kind of a dream.
Yeah. And so the Kissers, in a way, are part of it, right? Because we can be sort of a large umbrella group. The reason that it's a separate organization from, say, the Kissers is, in part, it's just because the Kissers, they played this rock and roll history show and they're like, yeah, that's cool. And I was like, oh, cool. Do you guys want to do more of this? They're like, no, not really.
Like, this is a you thing, Ken.
Yeah. Like, we just want to be a band and like play songs and, play shows. Like, okay, fine. Now, a few of the members are into it and are continuing on with me as Mobilize the Poets in our upcoming production. We have a second production that's coming up too. So I realized it needed to be a new company that's focused specifically on these rock and roll history shows, because it's a whole thing. Because it's part theater, part music, history. There's a lot of different parts. That's why, from a sort of business arts administration standpoint, I guess we have Mobilized the Poets. From a bigger point of view, it's a mission-driven organization, and what led me to the name, I feel like, was sort of inspirational even for the cause of the whole organization, and it ties into the Irish history. As I was researching my new show, which will be coming out in February 27th, also at the Barrymore, it's called After the War, 1919. As you can guess, it's an historical sequel about the year after the war, which is also a crazy year. One of the crazy things that happens that year is on January 21st, Ireland declares independence from Britain. They have their first parliament called the Dáil Éireann. And the president or rebel president of that rebel government is actually touring the United States and trying to drum up support. And in fact, he comes through Wisconsin, which is also an interesting story. The interim president is in jail in Gloucester as a political prisoner by the British, because he too is a rebel interim president and as frequently finds himself in jail. However, that doesn't stop him from issuing a memo to the members of the Dáil, the Parliament, who are not in jail. This man's name is Arthur Griffith. And he sends them a memo saying, go to Paris to the peace conference. This is the conference that will eventually result in the Treaty of Versailles. And it's considered the world's government at the time. There are dozens of countries there. He says, talk to these senators from the U.S. who are sympathetic to the Irish cause. He's basically telling them to talk to anyone who will recognize Ireland's sovereignty. He says, talk to these diplomats from countries whose revolutions Ireland aided over the past century. And then further down, he says, mobilize the poets. Perhaps Yeats. Yeah, I know it.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah. He talks a little bit more about it, and then in the end he says, perhaps Yeats can use his muse for Ireland now.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I read that and I shared it, because we're trying to think of a name. The names are so hard, at least for me, when coming like a band name or that kind of thing. And I was sharing it with actually my aunt and my cousin, and they both had their own comments. One said, I'd wear that on a shirt.
Yeah, I got goosebumps. Mobilize the poets.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so we've really taken that name and and I've sort of pondered it. It's like, okay, if we're going to be mobilize the poets, what does that mean? So we're mobilizing ourselves, right, as musicians, theater artists, historians, whoever, right, to do the work. But it's also a call out to it's a mobilizing of everyone. It's saying like, hey, you have this same ability in your own way. Everyone's got their unique talent, and yet the creativity is shared by all. And by the way, look at these just perfectly ordinary people, right, who lived in an extraordinary time and did extraordinary things because that's what that moment asked of them.
It's an activation for solidarity and doing it through art, like mobilize the poets and the history nerds. And what a beautiful way, like so much energy for Veterans Day to do a rock and roll, like multimedia performance. This sounds incredible, Ken. And you're such a good storyteller. And I was like, I want to play. This sounds fun.
Yeah, right. Let's do it.
And talking about the connections that we all experience. Now we can learn and celebrate veterans. So, Ken, I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on CityCast Madison and talk about your event. It sounds like it's going to be a smash.
I appreciate it so much, Bianca. Thanks for having me.
That's Ken Fitzsimmons, co-founder of the nationally touring Irish rock group The Kissers. If you want to see The Foe and the Fallen, stories from the greatest war at the Barrymore, head to our show notes for a link. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone who loves supporting our vets, edutainment, rock and roll, and history? And get to work on sharing this episode because that's a lot of people. All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care and rock on.